Imagine a sanctuary of green in the middle of a concrete jungle. The state park in São Paulo, Brazil, is supposed to be an escape. It's a massive reserve of Atlantic forest, a place where the roar of the city traffic fades into the sound of wind through the trees and birds calling out in the canopy. For the millions of people living in the chaotic, fast-paced sprawl of South America's largest city, this park is an oasis. It is a place for families, for lovers, for Sunday picnics. But in 1998, that oasis turned into a graveyard. The lush greenery became a curtain hiding a nightmare, and the winding trails that were meant for leisure became a hunting ground for one of the most prolific and manipulative predators the country had ever seen. The city of São Paulo was about to be gripped by a panic so intense that it changed the way women walked down the street. It changed the way they looked at strangers. The news reports started trickling in. At first just isolated incidents, but soon becoming a flood of horror. Bodies were being found in the park, not just one or two. We are talking about a systemic dumping ground for the innocent. These weren't gang hits or drug deals gone wrong. These were young women, full of life, stripped of their dignity, and discarded like trash in the underbrush. And as the police began to look closer, a terrifying pattern emerged. The victims were sexually assaulted, and marked, they bore the signature of a beast. Bite marks on their bodies, signs of a frenzied, uncontrollable rage masked by a calm exterior. The media dubbed him O Maníaco do Parque, or the Park Predator. And what made him so terrifying wasn't just the brutality of his crimes, it was how he got his victims to go with him. He didn't drag them into a van. He didn't hold a knife to their throats in a dark alley. No, this monster operated in broad daylight, in crowded places, hiding in plain sight. He was a chameleon. He was charming. He was the guy next door. He was a motoboy, a motorcycle courier, zipping through the traffic of the city, anonymous behind a helmet, yet deadly precise in his selection. His weapon of choice was hope. He weaponized the dreams of young women. You have to understand the context here. We are talking about young women from humble backgrounds, working low-paying jobs in retail or looking for employment. Women who dreamed of something better. They wanted to be seen, they wanted to be special, and then out of nowhere, this man would appear. He was articulate, energetic, and convincing. He would approach them near subway stations, particularly the busy Jabaquara line, or on the streets. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like an opportunity. He would spin a tale that was almost too good to be true, but just grounded enough to be believable. He claimed to be a talent scout for a major cosmetics company, or a famous magazine. He would tell these women that they had the look, that unique beauty the industry was dying for. He offered them good money, a legitimate contract, a chance to change their lives and help their families. He targeted women who looked a little lost, a little sad, or perhaps just tired of the grind. He had a radar for vulnerability. He would say things like, "You shouldn't be working here, you belong on a cover." It was the ultimate con. He carried a prop with him, a simple, flashy magazine or a business card. He acted professional. He would tell them that they needed to do a photo shoot, an ecological portfolio in a natural setting. He suggested the state park. It sounded artistic, it sounded professional, and because he was so good at his role, so utterly convincing in his performance of a busy, successful scout, they said yes. They climbed onto the back of his motorcycle, wrapping their arms around the man who would end their lives, believing they were riding toward a brighter future. But the ride didn't end at a photo shoot. It ended in the dense, isolated thickets of the park. Once they were deep enough in the woods, far from the prying eyes of park rangers or other visitors, the mask would slip, the charismatic talent scout would vanish, and the predator would emerge. The transition from dream to nightmare was instantaneous. There were no cameras, there was no makeup crew, there was only him, the trees, and the terrifying realization that they had been lured into a trap from which there was no escape. By the middle of 1998, the body count was rising, and the pressure on the police was reaching a boiling point. The public was demanding answers. Who was this man? How was he operating with such impunity? The investigation was sluggish at first, hampered by the vastness of the city and the lack of initial leads. But the killer was getting arrogant. He was confident in his ability to charm, to manipulate, and to disappear. He believed he was smarter than the authorities, a master of the game. He had attacked almost 24 women. Some miraculously survived to tell the tale, bearing the physical and emotional scars of their encounter. Their testimonies would eventually become the key to unlocking the identity of the monster. But before his capture, fear ruled the city. Every motorcycle courier became a suspect in the eyes of the public. Every man offering a compliment was viewed with suspicion. The park predator had effectively held the psyche of São Paulo hostage. He was a ghost, a rumor, a boogeyman who used words as his primary weapon. As we dive into this story, we have to look at the man behind the helmet, Francisco de Assis Pereira, a man with a history of trauma, a man living a double life, and a man whose twisted desires led him to hunt women for sport. How did a seemingly ordinary motorcycle courier become one of Brazil's most notorious serial killers? What drove him? And how, in his arrogance, did he leave the breadcrumbs that would finally lead the detectives to his door? This isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about the manipulation of innocence and the terrifying ease with which a monster can walk among us, smiling, offering us the world, while holding a death sentence in his hand. To understand the sheer magnitude of horror that Francisco de Assis Pereira unleashed, we have to peel back the layers of his psyche. This wasn't a man who simply snapped one day. The darkness had been festering for years, a toxic cocktail of trauma and sexual dysfunction that warped his view of reality. He would later claim that he was molested by an aunt as a child, a betrayal of trust that planted the seeds of a deep-seated misogyny. In his adult life, sexual encounters were marked by humiliation and pain. There was an incident with a partner that left him physically scarred and psychologically broken, a bite that nearly severed his manhood. These events didn't just embarrass him, they rewired him. He developed a hatred for women that was inextricably linked to his desire for them. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession. He wanted total, absolute control, the kind of control you can only have over someone who is terrified, bound, or dead. His modus operandi was chillingly consistent, a script he rehearsed until he could perform it in his sleep. He prowled the city on his motorcycle, a modern-day predator on two wheels. He favored the subway stations, specifically the end of the line at Jabaquara. It was a transit hub, a place of movement and anonymity. He looked for women who projected a specific energy, what he called sadness or heads down. He saw their insecurity not as a trait to be pitied, but as a crack in the armor he could exploit. He was a chameleon, shifting his personality to fit the victim's needs. If she was shy, he was gentle. If she was ambitious, he was professional. He introduced himself as a talent scout for a major cosmetics brand, sometimes using the name Chico Estrella or Chico Star. He sold them a fantasy, a modeling contract, a paycheck, a way out of their struggles. Take the case of Raquel Mota Rodrigues. She was 23 years old, working hard in a furniture store, just trying to help her family back in Rio Grande do Sul. She was ambitious. She had dreams. Francisco spotted her, and he spun his web. He convinced her to come with him for an ecological photo shoot. Raquel was smart. She called her cousin before she left. Her cousin warned her, told her it was too risky to go with a stranger, but the allure of the opportunity was too strong, and Francisco was too convincing. Raquel told her cousin, "I won't go." But she did. She climbed onto his bike, fueled by that glimmer of hope. She was found days later in the park, discarded in the underbrush. But the most macabre piece of evidence, the smoking gun that would tie Francisco undeniably to the carnage, was found right there at his former workplace. The owner of the courier company had called the police to report something disturbing. The toilet in the employee bathroom was clogged. When they broke the ceramic to fix it, they found the cause of the blockage. It wasn't just trash. Wedged inside the plumbing was a woman's identity card and a bone, a human rib bone. The ID belonged to Selma Ferreira Quiroz. Francisco had carried a trophy from his kill, a piece of his victim, and in a moment of panic or disposal, he had tried to flush it away. This discovery linked the charming Motoboy directly to the mutilated bodies turning up in the RIP. The police realized they weren't just looking for a rapist. They were hunting a necrophile, a serial killer who took souvenirs, a man who lived among them, delivered their packages, and smiled in their faces while harboring the darkest of secrets. The net was tightening. The park predator had a name. He had a face, and now he had nowhere left to hide. The hunt for Francisco de Assis Pereira was on, and the city held its breath, waiting for the moment the monster would finally be caged. With the discovery of the ID card and the human bone in the plumbing of his former workplace, the veil of anonymity was ripped away. Francisco de Assis Pereira was no longer a phantom haunting the nightmares of São Paulo. He was a fugitive with a name and a face. The police launched a massive manhunt, perhaps the largest in the history of the state. His photo was plastered on every television screen and every newspaper. Front page, the charming talent scout was exposed as a butcher, but Francisco had sensed the walls closing in. He had already fled the city, abandoning the concrete jungle for the southern border of Brazil, trying to disappear into the quiet, rural landscapes of Rio Grande do Sul, near the border with Argentina. For days, the country held its breath. Every phone call to the police was treated as a potential lead. And then, on August 4, 1998, the chase ended. Francisco was found staying with a fisherman in the city of Itaqui. When the authorities finally cornered him, there was no dramatic shootout, no desperate last stand. He didn't fight. In fact, reports from the time describe a man who seemed almost relieved, perhaps even enjoying the sudden surge of attention. He was brought back to São Paulo not in shame, but in a chaotic media circus. Crowds gathered outside the police station, screaming for justice, screaming for his blood. But inside the interrogation room, Francisco was calm. He was chatty. This is where the true depth of his psychopathy revealed itself. He didn't deny his actions. Instead, he owned them. With a chilling detachment, he confessed to the murders, but he spoke about them as if he were an observer, blaming an evil entity or a shadow that took over his body. He claimed that when the urge struck, he wasn't Francisco anymore. He was a force of nature. He described the details of the attacks with a precision that turned the stomachs of veteran detectives. He told them exactly how he strangled the women, how he bit them, and how he derived pleasure from their terror. He confessed to killing at least 10 women and attacking nearly 24 others. In a move that felt like a macabre tour, Francisco agreed to lead the police back into the state park to locate the bodies of the victims they hadn't yet found. Handcuffed, surrounded by heavily armed officers and a swarm of press photographers, he walked through the trails he knew so well. He pointed to patches of disturbed earth and dense thickets as if he were pointing out landmarks. "There is one here," he would say. And sure enough, the teams would dig and find skeletal remains. It was a surreal spectacle, the monster guiding the law through his own graveyard. The trial was a sensation. The evidence was overwhelming. The confessions, the survivor testimonies, the DNA, the items found in his possession, the court showed no mercy. Francisco de Assis Pereira was sentenced to a staggering total of 268 years in prison for homicide, rape, and concealment of a corpse. It sounded like justice. It sounded like a sentence that would ensure he never breathed free air again. But in Brazil, the legal system has a specific caveat that complicates this sense of closure. At the time of his conviction, the maximum time a citizen could serve in prison was 30 years. Regardless of the 268-year sentence, the law dictated that he could not be held past that 3-decade limit. While locked away, a strange and disturbing phenomenon occurred. Instead of being universally reviled, Francisco became a magnet for a specific type of obsession. He started receiving mail, not hate mail, but love letters, thousands of them. In his first month alone, he received nearly 1,000 letters from women all over Brazil. They called him misunderstood. They sent him perfumed notes, photos, and offers of marriage. It is a classic case of hybristophilia, sexual attraction to those who commit crimes. He even married one of his admirers while incarcerated, a woman who believed she could save him, though the relationship eventually fell apart as his erratic behavior continued even behind bars. Today, Francisco sits in a cell, claiming he is a changed man, claiming he has found religion and is now a normal person. But the psychiatrists who have evaluated him tell a different story. They describe a personality that is irreversible, a man who still harbors the same dark impulses that led him to the park in 1998. They warn that if he is released, he will kill again. It is not a matter of if, but when. And this brings us to the terrifying reality of the present day. Because of that 30-year limit in the Brazilian Penal Code, the park predator is scheduled for release in 2028. The year is fast approaching. The man who hunted women for sport, who bit and strangled them in the shadow of the trees, is legally entitled to walk out of the prison gates. The public prosecutor's office is fighting tooth and nail, seeking new psychiatric evaluations to declare him insane and keep him in a secure hospital indefinitely. But the legal battle is complex and uncertain. As the sun sets over the state park in São Paulo today, families still gather for picnics and joggers still run the trails. The forest has grown over the spots where the bodies were hidden. The birds still sing in the canopy, but for those who remember 1998, the park will always be haunted. The story of the Maníaco do Parque serves as a grim reminder that the most dangerous monsters don't look like monsters. They look like us. They smile. They offer us opportunities, and they tell us exactly what we want to hear. And in a few short years, the man who turned a green oasis into a hunting ground might be walking the streets again, looking for the next face in the crowd that looks a little too sad, a little too vulnerable, and ready to listen to a lie.